work at the LGBT Community Center here on 13th Street. Perhaps some of you have been there. I've been there since 1992. The center itself has been there for 25 years, 26 almost. And it's really, if 5,000 people come in there every week, it's a big old school building that's been renovated, and there's all kinds of, there's gay Scrabble players and, you know, ACT UP meetings, or the newest iteration of ACT UP. There are all kinds of activities that happen there all the time. There's a program for elders, there's a rock and youth program, there is an abundant beehive of LGBT activity. So that's what the agency is about, and what I do there is direct the family programs. My own son was born in 1988 via donor insemination with an anonymous sperm donor. My partner and I were among the first handful of families who organized the services component of the work I do called Center Kids in 1988 and 1989. And we were members of its first all-volunteer steering committee until I was hired as the first paid staff person in 1994. And the reason I'm telling you all that is to illustrate just how long I've been able to bear witness to LGBT people seeking to become parents and to create families in really, truly revolutionary ways. Since back when artificial insemination was a fairly kind of clandestine, word-of-mouth procedure conducted between helpful gay men and lesbians in private homes. You know, the phrase turkey baster a turkey baster baby didn't come about because doctors were using turkey basters, but because regular queer people were doing so with fresh sperm still warm from the good friend in the next room. And I remember well how profoundly empowered I felt as a woman, to a degree I never had, when I realized I could just go to the sperm store and make a baby whenever I wanted. And at the same time I was watching gay men who wanted the same thing every bit as much as I did, and they were completely frustrated and heartbroken because they couldn't do what I could do. So having a female body, a female-born body, suddenly meant so much more than vulnerability to attack, or lack of career choice, or limited options for team sports or military service, because in this regard, it was really way better. And then HIV came along, and it sort of ruined the cozy, informal approach to insemination. And suddenly, a deadly disease that can be transmitted in semen made the involvement of medical professionals essential, both to test the sperm for the virus before insemination and to preserve semen long enough for an effective quarantine period. Suddenly, men who had sex with men were deemed unacceptable donors in the medical system because AIDS was a gay disease. HIV and AIDS wasn't the only reason for this. There were other reasons, like paternity claims and other custody and decision-making conflicts between parties made lawyers necessary in the process too, as did the longing on the part of lesbian couples to have their families defined as the two of them plus baby, no dad. The state also weighed in, particularly in the lives of poor lesbians with children, requiring them to name a father before they could, in order to pursue him for child support before they were allowed to receive public assistance. And sometimes, so that in those situations, sometimes it was better for the mothers simply not to know the father's name. And once lawyers and doctors and cryopreservation banks and the FDA and the CDC got involved, suddenly having babies deliberately as queer people became a big, intrusive, very expensive business. Insurance companies required a diagnosis of infertility in order to even minimally cover the outlandish expense of assisted reproductive technologies, a definition that didn't fit the medical conditions of lesbians seeking services. Suddenly big systems were intruding in our ability to have children big time. So fast forward, 20 years later, a full generation has passed, and I've heard a lot of stories in those 20 years. I've listened to lesbians who are inseminating with their lover's father's sperm, to two gay men who adopted an embryo being gestated by a lesbian friend, where all three of those adults, along with the involvement of the straight couple that generated the embryo to begin with, were going to cooperatively raise the child. To the gay men and the lesbian who had 3 children together, moved to the suburbs, and along with the woman's partner, were co-parenting kids in an openly neighborly queer household. Ozzy, Harriet, and Harriet. Queer people are committing radical revolutionary reproductive acts every day, which we now, this many years into it, tend to forget, in order to create their families, and I'm really in awe every day of the risks that they take to do that. Sperm washing and intrauterine insemination used to be considered advanced or high-tech, and it's now routine. The use of donor eggs and IVF was beyond esoteric only a few years ago. Now many LGBT people lives of many young lesbians often include these dewy-eyed dreams of carrying a pregnancy with her lover's egg and donor sperm. We run support groups in my program for men pursuing parenthood through surrogacy, for LGBT people interested in meeting one another for the purposes of cooperative co-parenting, and for women challenged by fertility problems. Our earliest offspring are now entering young adulthood, sometimes sitting on panels like we're having tonight and giving voice to their experience using their own words, not their parents. Some of them aren't happy about their lesbian mother's decisions to employ an anonymous donor, and donor searches, which are not so impossible now thanks to the internet, are being conducted often successfully. Websites such as DonorSiblingRegistry.com are assisting kids and parents seeking to meet biological brothers and sisters. So, through one lens, all this is progress, yet by other measures, time has stood still. Men who have sex with men are still excluded as sperm donors by almost all sperm banks. The cost of accessing reproductive technologies is still even more astronomical, and insurance coverage is still very limited. The complexities in thinking big and broad and deep about these issues really makes me dizzy, but I'm happy to be able to have these kinds of forums to do so. So I just want to list some of the complexities that I see arising. One is sex and gender selection, which is hardly new. Boys have long been prized and preferred in cultures the world over, particularly as children have been considered both as assets, as workers, and as property. In modern-day China, for example, it's frequently cited as a dire example of the consequences of male gender preference combined with a one-child policy, with reports of female infanticide, abandonment, selective abortion, and baby selling, and that have resulted years later with a new disproportionately male generation, one causing unanticipated social problems. I actually don't know how accurate these reports are. I'm very dismayed that our willingness in the West to reduce the analysis to bad China and good America, where we are the rescuers and swoop in to do the rescuing. But what's been interesting to me is how that phenomenon of Chinese adoption has revealed that, in fact, here in the US at least, there's a tremendous preference for girls in adoptive families. And recent research has indicated that regardless of the country of origin, whether the child is adopted through the foster care system or private adoption, parents in fact prefer to adopt girl children.